Hi everyone, welcome back to my Kubernetes Crash Course series. My name is Suraj Singh Rajput. I'm a DevOps engineer and a technical trainer. In this module, we will learn about Kubernetes deployment as well as what are the advantages of deployment over the pod. So without a further delay, let's move back into video. Welcome back people. So in this module, we will understand the difference between normal pod as well as deployment and what new features pod has to offer us. As we saw in case of Kubernetes pod, we did not have auto healing facility. So let's check, has Kubernetes deployment has been able to solve this issue? Yeah. So let's check it. All right people. So as we start here, as you can see, what is the difference between pod and deployment? So when we were discussing about pod, we saw the difference between traditional containers as well as pod. But let's try to understand what is the difference between pod and deployment since we are discussing about Kubernetes deployment. Of course, in both pod as well as deployment, for both pod as well as for deployment, we will be writing a YAML file. We'll be writing a YAML file. So that means traditional way of running the commands to create a containers has been taken out from this equation. Yeah. But is there a difference between pod and deployment? Yes. So if you remember, towards the end of module 4, we tried to delete the pod. Yes, we were successful in deleting the pod, but the function of Kubernetes is to replace the deleted pod with a new one, but it did not happen. Right. So that is the reason, that is one of the drawbacks of the pod. Means still Kubernetes pods are ephemeral in nature. We were not able to break through that particular concept. So now for this, we created something called as deployment. So let's try to understand whether deployment is able to take out this particular concept of auto healing, or whether he is able to implement the concept of auto healing, yes or no. So the new features your deployment has to offer us something called as rolling updates as well as rollbacks. Yes. So it is one of the other concept. So I'll make a separate session. I'll have a separate session on this particular thing, where we will be discussing about how to roll out the changes and how to roll back the changes. But for now, you just understand only this thing. That is, there is something called as rolling updates and rollbacks. So this is a feature which we have in Kubernetes deployment. This feature allows us to deploy an application or to revert an application with zero downtime. You see, zero downtime, we can roll out and we can roll back. All right people, so let's check what does the second point means. See, the major drawback of pod was, once it is deleted, we couldn't create a new pod, or Kubernetes couldn't create a new pod. For that purpose, what we have done is, we are using something called as deployment in Kubernetes, where in the manifest file, you will clearly mention something as deployment. Earlier, in my previous manifest file of your Kubernetes pod, we had something called as kind pod. In case of deployment, we will have something called as kind deployment. And once you use kind deployment, these features we will get there. One such feature is what? Something called as replica set. All right people, let's try to understand the second point, where there's a user who has created a manifest file about deployment, right? And deployment in turn creates the pod. Means deployment is helping us to create a pod. Correct? This is the case. And if any one of the pod has been deleted, deployment will understand the pod has been deleted for some reason, and he'll take that node and immediately the initiation will happen to create a new pod. All right. You have created deployment. Deployment will help us to create what? Pods. But in the middle, initially deployment will create replica sets. In the middle, deployment will initially create a replica set called as RS. Right. This in turn will create something called as pods, or you can consider he is the one tasked with maintaining the actual state. Actual state of pods. Actual state in the sense you can consider actual number of pods. In the deployment file, if you written I need 4 pods, until towards the end, the deployment and replica set will make sure number of pods, that is 4 number of pods, has been maintained. So this will be taken care by whom? Your replica set. And who will create a replica set? Your deployment will create a replica set. This will actually compare your YAML file, how many pod has been mentioned in the YAML file, and whether these things has been maintained actually in the practical things. Alright people, this is what your replica sets. As the name itself indicate, he'll maintain all the replicas. Correct. So because replica set will always be observing how many pods are there, and he will be replacing immediately the deleted pods or for some reason terminated pods. It provides self-healing by replacing the pods that fail or become unresponsive. That is what we were looking for. So immediately in case of pod, we did not have this facility, but in turn when we came across the deployment, we came up with the solution for your auto healing facilities. Alright people? Yes. And in turn it helps us to increase or decreasing the pods, right? That is what we call it as auto scaling or HPA, horizontal auto scaling. Right? So we will check that one particular thing also. But right now, this is the actual thing. Whenever we create a deployment, deployment will create replica set, and that in turn will create pod. And if the pod is deleted, replica set compares this with actual file, YAML file, and will try to make sure those many number of pods are maintained at any point of time. And as you can see, a replica set is a part of your controller manager. You know, right? If you're not aware of what is controller manager, please go back and watch your Kubernetes architecture video. There I have clearly explained. This is controller manager, right? This will help us to create, or he is the one responsible for maintaining this replica sets, and automatically replica sets will maintain the number of pods for us. And replica set is one of the default controller manager, and there are certain other default controller managers also. There is a list of default control managers, but as and when required in our sessions, we'll be discussing about those default control managers. And one more thing, you can create custom controller manager also. That also we'll check it. Right. But right now people, let's move ahead with our practical sessions where we will discuss how to create a deployment, and majorly, do we have any drawbacks in case of Kubernetes deployment? We will check that particular thing also. And yeah, let's move ahead. So alright people, so let's move into our deployment. As you can see, I just simply searched for Kubernetes deployment, and he has taken me on to which place? Kubernetes deployment page. And let's check here. Can you see? A deployment manages a set of pods to run on an application workload. Right. So how does he manages? Can you see? Okay, where is it? rollback, this is what we saw there. And can you see, he creates generally replica sets to manage these things. But with this, as you can see, this is my YAML manifest file for a deployment. Like I mentioned, in the manifest file itself, we will mention the number of pods that is required to create. As you can see, if you can compare during Kubernetes pod, when we created Kubernetes pod and kind of stuff, kind was represented as what? Pod. And there metadata was Nginx deployment kind of stuff. That is fine. If you observe in this case, they have clearly mentioned one more thing, that is replicas. Replicas are what? 3. So that means if I borrow this particular deployment manifest file, it will help me to create 3 replicas. That means 3 pods of same specifications and exactly same copies. And what are those copies? You can see specifications for containers are name of the container is Nginx, image we will be using inside a container is also of Nginx 1.14.2, and it has allowed a port called as 80 there. Correct. But along with that, you can see there is something called as label, and templates also it has been added, and it says something called as match label. There's one more thing, labels app Nginx. What is this something called as labels? Labels, something called as selectors. Very, very important concept. So we will come back to this one. First, let's deploy our pods. Let's check whether these pods have auto healing facility. Once we understood, yes, the pods is having auto healing facility, then let's understand what are the drawbacks that we have in Kubernetes deployment. All right, people, let's move on. So for this purpose, let me copy this entire stuff to a clipboard. Let me enter my Kubernetes cluster. Same thing, I'll do something called as vi deployment.yml, and I'll just dump my information. Can you see? Once it is done, let me save and come out from this particular space. Right. Now, if I check there, I got how many? There is a deployment.yml as well as pod.yml. Pod we already seen. Now let's move on to deployment.yml. Before I move ahead, let me check in my cluster, are there any other pods running? So let me clear this entire stuff. So it says currently in my Kubernetes cluster, none of the pods are running. So what we will do is, let's go and let's apply this Kubernetes deployment file. Let's check what will happen now. To apply, we will be using what? kubectl, that is kube controller we call it as. By using this only, we will be talking to my Kubernetes API server. Can you see? Deployment.apps, and the name of the deployment is Nginx deployment. It has been what? Created. Right. So let's check whether it has been created or not by using the same command, kubectl get pods -o wide. Yep. Can you see, people? Okay. Cannot zoom out. That is fine. This is one pod particularly. There is one more pod. There is one more pod. All the 3 pods has different IP addresses. All the 3 pods has what? Different IP addresses, and all of these pods are inside your Minikube node. All right. So now we'll do the same stuff. We will do SSH into Minikube. We will try to access all the pods. Just to confirm, the content of the pod, does it remains the same or not? Means And you need to observe, every container is having only, every pod is having only one container, one by one. I asked him to create one container in one pod, he has created one container in one pod. So every pod is having different IP. There is a reason why I'm stressing on this thing. Please remember and please focus here. What is the IP of the pod? 456. Remember, this remains same, 244.0, this remains same. The end point, 4, 5 and 6. Currently, there are 3 pods, each pod has its individual IP address, and 4, 5 and 6 are the IPs of the pod. Now, let me enter into this pod. How do I enter? Minikube, SSH. Once I'm here, what I can do? I can use same once again, CURL -L HTTP, so 10.244.0.4, correct. So let me check this one, will it work or not? Yes, can you see the content is same. If I use number 5 and 6 also, the number will remain same or the content will remain same. Content remains same everywhere, because as in the deployment file we clearly mentioned we needed a replica of these pods. Yes, he has created 100%. Right. Remember what was IPs? 4, 5 and 6. Now let me exit from here and let's check whether deployment is able to solve the issue of Kubernetes pod. Yes or no. How can I do it? Let me go and let me delete one pod, any one particular pod. Let's check what will happen. See, we are looking for auto healing feature. Let's check. For this, I need to know the ID of the pods. I'll just copy. This is my ID. As you can see, I copied one ID of the pod. Can you see? What does it say? Pod has been deleted. And which pod have I deleted? The first pod. Correct. This pod I have deleted. So after deleting, we need to check once again. That is the reason I'll go and use -o void. Can you see? Still 3 pods are running. I know. Even I have deleted this pod, even though I deleted a particular pod, Kubernetes has solved this issue and he has replaced this deleted pod with a new pod. Correct? Can you see? Currently 3 pods are running. But the catch is here, the IP address of the pod is gone. What is the IP address of the pod? 10.244.0.4, 5 as well as 6. Here 5, 6 and 7. That means deployment is able to create or replace the pod, but what about the IP addresses? So as of now, you might be thinking that it is not a big deal, any IP addresses, it will be replaced, or you were very near observing whether the pod will be recreated or not. Yes, pod has been recreated. But let me explain what happens when the IPs are replaced. So let's try to understand this. What happens if you try to replace the, or what happens if the IPs are replaced? Right, this is what happens. This is a hypothetical scenario once again. You can consider in this way. Imagine there is a user, right? So this user is accessing the pod on 244, 0.4. And for him, the pod was running perfectly. He was accessing this one. And for some reason, pod has been deleted and the deployment in its place and replica sets, they have recreated this pod once again. That is actually true. But what happened is 0.6 or 7, the IP address has been replaced. So he doesn't know whether the IP has been replaced. He will still be pinging on the same IP address. Then he will not be able to reach this particular pod. With the frustration, he will leave this thing. So you can argue with me saying that, oh, we can easily communicate with him because see, we can just text him saying that, okay, the pod has been deleted, pod has been recreated, so it is a new thing. But observe, as we discussed, pods are ephemeral in nature. That means they will be replaced on a daily basis, frequent number of times, n number of times it will be replaced. How many times will you pass on this information to him? That is not going to happen. Right. So this is the issue with your Kubernetes deployment. Yes, Kubernetes is able to solve this issue. Kubernetes deployment is able to solve the issue of auto healing feature, but it has caused a new issue, not issue. With this, there is a new issue, that is names or the replacement of IP addresses. So how to solve this one? But before this, let's check whether this is true or not. Let me show people. That is SSH. If I try to access that particular thing, or without that, can you see? 4 minutes ago, a new Nginx has been created of a pod. There is a pod, you see a pod, this is a pod, there is a container also running inside that particular space. But, okay, I'm looking for the destroyed one. We'll be able to see somewhere in this particular thing. Yes. Alright, so that particular pod is deleted and we won't be able to access that pod even if I try to access with a particular IP address. So what is the best solution? We should be accessing via domain names. Yes. So for that also we have a different topic we'll discuss in the later sessions, but immediately we have an option, that is, alright people, let me come out from here. So how do you delete a deployment then? Because see, you created a deployment file. Once the deployment file is created, at any point of time, he will be making sure the 3 number of pods or 3 pods are maintained all the time. It is just like your auto scaling option in your AWS, where if you already have or if you created desired state, minimum and maximum, he will always try to maintain the minimum number of things. In the same way, if you want to delete all the EC2 servers in AWS, you need to go and delete what? Auto scaling option. In the same way, here also, if you want to delete the pods, you should delete your Kubernetes deployment completely. Deployment configurations. How to do it? Let's check. But before this, kubectl get deployment. This is a command. If you run this command, can you see? There is something called as Nginx deployment. That is the name of the deployment we gave. And he clearly says 3 by 3 ready because I asked for 3, thus 3s are ready. And he says up to date 3, available 3. When did I create? 10 minutes ago. Hope you understood some people what am I trying to understand? So if you want to delete this one, entire Kubernetes deployment, this is what you should be doing there. kubectl delete, not a pod, it is a deployment. Delete deployment. Nginx deployment. Can you see? He, along with this one, he has deleted your entire deployment. Right. Let's check it whether it's deleted or not. Can you see? Everything is gone. Right. So hope you understood how to create a deployment and what problems deployment is solving and what problem deployment has created and how to delete a deployment. So let's check. So if I have to put it in a simple words, deployment and pod. pod and deployment both uses manifest file. Right. By using deployment, we can create replicas and we can maintain multiple replicas by using deployment file. But by using pod, that facility is not available, and in pod there is one more facility that is not available, that is of auto healing. But that facility is available in which place? Deployment. You can do auto healing as well as auto scaling also, and all the other features that we saw. Right. So hope you understood the difference between deployment as well as pod, both the things. So before I move ahead, let me give you one particular thing. There's a question that is, see, currently in my deployment file, I use 3 replicas. In case if you want to increase these 3 replicas to 100, how will you do it? In case if you want to increase the replicas to or bring down the replicas from 3 to 1, what can we do it? Simple thing, we'll go to this particular space. Where is it? Instead of replicas, we'll use what? Something called as replicas 3. We will reduce it to 1 if you want to maintain only 1 replica. If you want to increase the replicas, you'll maintain it to 100. If this session has helped you learn about Kubernetes, do hit like, share and subscribe button for Star Ajay. I will meet you in the next video. Till then, keep learning.